Thank you, Mike. And let me open it by saying thank you to Libby, I think, for writing the book, for sharing so much of yourself in the book, and for spending time with us here today. So I think at first glance, people look at this book and say, oh, it's a book about how you build a really successful business, which it is. But I think it's like a much richer story than that. It's a story of your professional life. It's a story of the company that you built with your brother and later your husband. And then as I read it, I really thought it's a story about courage. And so I thought maybe we'd open by that. I love that you open the book talking about your father and his decision to open Connolly, which is really a decision that sets the stage for the book, but also the growth and massive success of the company. And so you say this, you say, the inexperience of my youth prevented me from fully comprehending what courage it must have taken, the way he must have felt the day that he made that important decision. And when I read that, I was hooked. Like, I am a child of parents who I think made really brave choices. I am a parent of small children, and I hope that they look back and say that I made brave choices. And so I thought maybe we could start by you sharing with the audience a bit about your dad and that decision and how it sort of guided you during the next few decades.
So, Mike, by the way, thanks for all those kind words. That was really nice. It's just nice to hear all that about yourself from somebody else. my husband, my kids, they think, I just don't get that from them. Okay, so talking about my father, you can't really tell the story of Connolly and this, really the story of the business without really talking about my father. He was the one who started this business. He was 58 years old when he made that decision. And this was like in the late 70s, 1978, 1979 timeframe. So, during that period of time, right, you can just think of the backdrop. He just finished a 25-year career in the retail industry, corporate guy the whole way. And the idea of working for yourself, starting your own company, we're all very accustomed to the concept of entrepreneurs and startups today, but that was a very, very novel idea at the time. I'm the youngest of four by 6 years. At the time, I was a 10th grader going into 11th grade, still had me to put through college. All my other siblings were kind of through the pipeline, if you will. And then we had basically no safety net. He was a corporate guy. He was a hired gun, and didn't have a big bank account really. We had 2 mortgages on our house in Rye, and you can imagine what the interest rates were like in the 70s, right? They're like double what they are today. So it was kind of like. And then many years later, right? He passed it around 1998. And I don't know why, but none of us ever thought to ask him that very fundamental question. It would have been so much safer for him to just go get another job, working, for another big corporation. He certainly had, the credentials and the track record to go do that. But he didn't decide to do that. I mean, he spent some time researching it, the idea. He was a Harvard Business School guy, so in a way he did have some training, right, to think independently. But he was like a finance marketing guy, not like some sort of a. Now they have schools about training students how to be entrepreneurs. But he did make that bold decision, and the only, we'll never know. We will never really know why he decided what he did. It's one of the biggest regrets of never asking him, like, the most fundamental question. Hey, why did you decide to do this thing that ended up being, such an incredible opportunity, not only, for my brother and myself and my husband, but for our entire family and for so many others who worked for us. We had sold our family house in around 2012, and part of that process was, of course, cleaning everything out. I mean, we were shutting down the family house. In my father's office, he had an office in this house, and with many, many boxes. He did keep a lot of original records, letters between him and my mom when they were separated in early years of his career. And many, first of all, there was no email, right? So everything was done with a letter, mostly typewritten, but some of these letters were actually handwritten and almost impossible to read. I put a few of them in the book. You get the sense of it. Handwriting was gorgeous, but very indecipherable. But that became my only really resource, really, to try to understand why he made the decision he made. And then I even asked my brothers and sisters. I interviewed all of them for this book, and everybody kind of came up with, like, not really sure.
Yeah.
Can't believe we never asked him that question. But we all agree on one thing. It did take a lot of courage. And I think that is really what we were left with, is that, we had the benefit of seeing someone we tremendously respected do something very bold. And in a way, it kind of left us with that feeling that, we could do something similar.
Yeah. So you also talk about, like, how your father's decision and then his philosophy, like, seeded what ultimately becomes this really big company. And one of the first memories that you shared in the book was about the philosophy of integrity and how it was going to define every decision that was made. I was really inspired reading about the channel engagement, which, for folks who haven't read the book, was just an audit. There was a breach of an agreement and sort of a question about what you do in that moment. And you said, channel taught us a valuable lesson, not just in client relations, but in how my father's level of integrity would forever define our approach to working with clients. And so I thought maybe you'd talk and share with the audience a little bit about how that set the stage for the way that you all did business. And then ultimately, when you worked with the company to define the values, like, that made it in there.
Yeah. So channel, if you haven't, if you're not kind of probably from my era, but channel was is Channel Home Centers. So it was like the original Home Depot or Lowe's, kind of trying to think that line. And this was Connolly's client number 2. My dad kind of got his start by kind of working his network of relationships within the retail industry. So his entire career was mostly working for Federated department stores, but he was. They had all sorts of forums for the financial executives to get together, and he made many relationships through those forums. And so one of his old colleagues was the CFO. When they never called them CFOs in those days, they were treasurers of Channel Home. Channel Home Centers. And he came in and hired. Gave my father the opportunity to do an engagement there. And in order to really I've got to spend 2 seconds on the business model just so everybody can follow this story. But the idea is that retailers of all sorts, they are addicted to negotiating lots and lots of price concessions, discounts, allowances, rebates, and so on. And so the business model was that we would go in and we would identify leakage. So where a retailer would negotiate some sort of price concession from one of their suppliers, and then then they would have to kind of reconcile like what that translated to in terms of dollars. And none of these retailers had very sophisticated systems. These were, the days before enterprise systems, but the beginning of enterprise systems. And the enterprise systems were really, really good at processing transactions, but they weren't great at, dealing with the complexity of these buying agreements. So we went in and did basically a review of their rebates. And it turned out that they had a major control issue, like major. And it was so big that the person who hired my father would have gotten fired, most likely, if we didn't kind of work something out. And my father, quickly kind of figured out, even though like contractually, he was entitled, and quite frankly, he needed the money to every dollar, that he was more interested in playing the long game. Right, and it was client number 2, and the only way he was going to get client number 3 is if his success at client number 1 and number 2, went well. And so he worked through that challenge with this, in this situation. And, at first, you never really, you do things because it's like kind of also the right thing to do, but it's also, you have choices. And that was a choice that he made. And it kind of forever defined for us how we approach, working with our clients. It has to be win-win. It's got to work for them. It's got to work for us. The company enjoyed incredible client retention rates as a result of this. We had something like 99% client retention, which is remarkable. And the only reason why we lost a client is to like a Chapter 11, type of scenario, or a merger and an acquisition. And I am like still like, when we'll get to like the healthcare side of our story, but our first healthcare client is still, Cotiviti. The company has been rebranded as Cotiviti, but it's still, it's still one of Cotivity's like biggest clients. And we still work for Walmart. We still work for Target. We still work for Lowe's and Home Depot. And these relationships have been going on for decades. So that was a major learning and a mindset. We did have competitors, and our competitors, we were able to differentiate ourselves because we were kind of known as being a little bit more friendly to work with and a little bit nicer.
I think it also speaks to legacy too, right? How sort of decisions you make in a moment, like seed, they grow, they change the way it feels, and then there's these massive retention rates, like that you're not losing clients. It's a huge impact of that.
Well, he also understood that it was a lot harder to get a new client than just kind of keeping an existing client happy and then having some sort of an annuity.
Yeah.
Right? Can I just say one more thing? Go. So, Mike, you were talking about, you were kind of bragging about like how the company kind of grew, and we went public, and then we went back private, and the valuation that was around 2018 was at $5 billion. Maybe 3 weeks ago, the company just traded again for an $11 billion valuation. Amazing. Got to give the man credit.
So you joined the company when you were young. And you started at the bottom as a contractor. There's a bunch of great stories in there about all the places in the United States that your work took you. And we get to follow you. We get to see you grow into your role at the company at the same time as the company is growing. And you do a really nice job, I think, telling that story. And so you said, here's where the courage comes in again. It takes courage to take on new roles and responsibilities at such a young age, especially when those responsibilities require you to make an executive decisions for a business that was considered an underdog. And I thought it maybe would be good for us to spend a little time talking about that transition as you grew into the role and what that time was like.
So I actually I graduated from Tulane in 1984. I worked for the World's Fair. That was my first job, for the electric energy exhibit. But around, end of July 1984, got a phone call from my father. And he's kind of like saying, all right, enough. It's time. It's time for you to leave New Orleans. It's time for you to leave Louisiana. The business is taking off. I could use some help. I just put you through college, so you kind of owe me. And so he was very kind of like, and he did need the help. And so I agreed to that, and I was kind of ready. It was getting super hot, and I had never spent a summer. I had never spent a summer in Louisiana, so I didn't really fully appreciate like how hot it really got down here.
I love the reasons people make decisions. You're like, it's hot.
It's hot. I'll go. So I did start off by just doing some basic bookkeeping for him. I had no skills. Before that, my resume read sailing instructor, sailing instructor, sailing instructor. But I did do some bookkeeping, and then then I started to do some client engagement work because he kind of said, hey, I didn't put you through college for you to just be a bookkeeper. But I actually learned a lot doing the accounting for the business because that came and served me later. And then I went off and did client engagement work. So my first engagement was in Bentonville, Arkansas, for a company called Walmart at the time, less than $10 billion in revenue at that time, right? Like, can you imagine what it was like being in Bentonville, Arkansas in the late 80s? But anyway, that was stop number one, and then a few other ones in the Deep South in Ocala, Florida, and then others. And then we kind of had a very difficult situation, family situation arise. My mother had found out that she had a heart condition. She was 60 years old at the time, so my age right now, healthy as can be. Went in for open heart surgery, and surgery went great, but she had some massive strokes in the recovery room. And because she was 60 years old and we weren't expecting this to happen, we elected, very regrettably, to save her life. And she ended up being, these surgeons just like are so convincing, and you have so much hope, especially under those conditions, right? But we did the decompression surgery, and then she was completely paralyzed, arms, legs, couldn't even feed herself. And so my father, we all kind of came together as a family, right? Because this was like the safety net for now all of us. And my father really had to kind of shift his focus away from the business to my mother's care. So at a very young age, I was 24 at the time, and she lived for 5 years. So it was like brought us kind of into our 30s. But by the time she passed, my dad was like, I've had enough, and he decided at that point in time to transition the business over to my brother and myself. So I had just gotten married. I was just about to have my first baby. My brother Larry was 6 years older than I was, and then my brother and then my husband Robert just entered the business with he graduated from BU with a computer science degree, and we were very, very inexperienced. We had a little experience, but a lot of experience. And our two biggest competitors, one had been formed in the 1970s and had the most market share. And then at the same time, by the way, by a bunch of retail executives very similar to my father. And they were international, they were quite large. And then there was another company in formation by a separate group of retail executives. So these are people with a lot of experience, right? And then we're like these three kids in their 30s with a little bit of support, by my dad and a lot of his colleagues who were working for the firm. But, both of these companies were either had a long track record of experience or had a lot of tenured people and a lot of capital. And this is at the same time when we started to work with data. And we didn't have a lot of capital. In fact, we had no capital. We were using all of our own money. But we got very, very lucky and in a number of ways. But it was at the same time, when PC computing was becoming more affordable, and some of our competitors were taking different paths. So yes, we were up against some big challenges. And it did take courage to kind of like believe in ourselves, and it just ended up working out.
So it's interesting because in the book you talk about this, and you have this like great stories of like your brother like going to the Computerland store to like use the computer to process some things, like the sample computer. But what you thought of at the time as disadvantages compared to these other entrenched competitors ended up being advantages. You didn't sink a bunch of money into that big tech investment because, one, you didn't have it, and two, you thought of a different way, and it feels like that paid off and it led to the success.
It did. I guess I think we got a little lucky. It's like anything you do in life. Yeah. A little bit of, you get that one break and you make the most of that break, right? And so for us, we had Robert, who had a computer science degree. Larry messed around. He went to business school here at Tulane and worked at the Computerland store down on like downtown somewhere, and so that's where he got his first kind of exposures to, home computing, and then, I took my Computer 101 class as an elective as a senior here, and learned a few things, not much, but enough to know what the opportunity behind technology. And so one of the first things I did for the company, like that related to a computer project, was, everything was done, like our clients would like give us boxes of paper, and we would like sift through like, invoices and purchase orders and all sorts of freight agreements, right? Put the whole story together. And initially we would actually take that information and input it into a computer to create a database, if you can believe this, right? So it's, you're manually creating your own databases. And I went out and bought this DB3, this program with the floppy disks, and successfully did this special project for Target. And it ended up being, we found a lot of money, and we did it in a very, very efficient way. And I think, we all kind of saw that there was this new and different way you could approach doing the work. And we kind of rode the PC computing wave. And our competitors were very married to mainframe computing. It was very expensive, and it wasn't very flexible. And as we started to get data sets from our clients, they were big data sets. We were way more nimble, and we could do a lot more with the data, and that meant we could find a lot more leakage. So it was like, we were able to differentiate ourselves just by having a different approach.
So some of it was by necessity, right? You were making choices with what you had, but it struck me a lot that you made a lot of intentional choices. You were intentional about risk. You were intentional about the way that you grew. You say in the book that you're not a big gambler. You don't believe in making big bets, right? So you start small, you test it out, figure out if it worked. And you also talk about being really intentional about saying no. And that how the no decisions are actually harder than the yes decisions. And so I wonder if you'd share a little bit with that of the audience, or the combination of those two things, that intentionality and how it served you.
Well, we learned the hard way, because again, we had these big competitors, and they were, busy expanding their market, not only with geography, but also different segments. Manufacturing is an example. It was later that was healthcare, but we had competitors going into the healthcare space, from an accounts payable, because that's really where the business got started, is like all through like dealing with accounts payable transactions. And so, as we needed to figure out how to like build this business and expand it, right? Because we had these two big competitors. It's either like grow or die, right? So we, and then we had to figure out, well, if they were doing certain things, we kind of thought that we had to follow them. Follow them over to the UK, follow them into Europe, Asia, Australia. We didn't end up doing those things. But we were always second guessing ourselves, because we were like, well, God, if they're doing it, we better be doing it too, right? And then we realized, like some of this stuff actually doesn't work out very well. And we learned that lesson the hard way. And that's when we kind of learned that the no decisions are just as important as the yes decisions. When you work with a lot of very, we were young and very inexperienced, and, a big approach for us was, and we don't know what we don't know. So we hired a lot of people who actually had expertise that we did not have. And then, that was great and everything, but then they would come to us with all these incredible ideas, right? And you have to kind of sit there and say, well, that's really great, but how do I say, how do you let them down? Because we can't do everything. And at first we said yes to way too many things, and then found out the hard way that we needed to be more deliberate and more focused. Sometimes, and that's kind of how we kind of pivoted and kind of said, what, the best way to, when you have an idea is we embraced the idea of a pilot. And this was after going into Germany and losing a lot of money. We lost a lot of money doing some, saying yes to things we shouldn't have said yes to. But one of the best yeses that we ever said, what we ever contemplated, was we hired a guy. So as the business was growing, we were getting more clients. And the way for us to staff these engagements was we would kind of go out to our team and say, well, go find some of your old colleagues and let's just hire them. And, well, we kind of ran out of people to hire because like relationships were, like their generation of executives that had been moving on. So then we started to hire people kind of outside of the retail industry. And this is when most of our work was still in retail. And this is like the late 90s. And there's this guy, Peter Campisi, and he got hired to work on a grocery audit for us in Virginia. And, he worked on it for maybe like 6 months. And then, he got the opportunity to meet Larry and I. And he basically said, so listen, you guys, if you think that there are like retailers have leakage issues, and he was a former CFO of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Maryland, right? And so and he was doing this work for us for this grocer, and he's like, you think there's leakage problems in retail? Like you should see the problems in healthcare. And he's like, let me get you this meeting with this friend of mine. So he got a meeting with a friend of his who was the CFO of a division of United Healthcare. And this is in the days when United Healthcare was, they basically were all decentralized. Nothing had been knitted together yet. And sure enough, they were old colleagues, and he's like, yeah, we got a problem here. And so that's how we got into healthcare. It was the best yes we ever said. But then when we said yes, we're like, oh no, we got a bigger problem. We have no idea how to work with medical claims. And that was also during the time when HIPAA was emerging, right? And there were all these like issues around working with healthcare data and like big claims, like if you like had like a data, like a data exposure, if you lost data. And all of our, we had no data security. Data security didn't exist in those days. We had offices with their own servers, and we had people with laptops with like healthcare data on the laptops. They were getting stolen out of cars. And it was like kind of scary because then there were these big like claims, and we're like, oh no, we can't get sued. So we had a lot to learn, and we had a lot to worry about. But that's how we got into healthcare. It was kind of one of these yeses that we said yes to, and we were glad we didn't say no.
Okay, so let's keep talking about that, because I want to get to the healthcare part, and I thought that was courageous too, because like I teach healthcare, I teach health policy, and like we always start out with like healthcare is different. It's just different. And plenty of people think that they can get in healthcare and take something that worked in a different industry, and then they just fall flat. And so I noted that in the book, that you actually say in the same sentence, you're like, oh wow, this is really interesting, and then like, oh no, like what do we do? And you also shared about that meeting in Chicago where United Healthcare was, shall we say, displeased with you. And I thought about that. I was like, that would be a moment on the streets in cold Chicago that you're like, let's just go back to what we know. Like, what are we doing here? But you didn't.
We didn't.
And I mean, like, what was going through your mind then?
Well, it was like, should we be walking away? Like, that's what, like at that moment in time, it was like, oh my gosh, this client just read us the Riot Act. They just told us that we have been overpaid in fees by $2 million. And of course,
and they would like that back.
They would like that back. And I'm like, oh, I don't have $2 million. Like, right then, like, right. Oh no. It was like, Houston, we have a problem. But like anything else, they also had a problem. And they're like, so they were busy kind of trying to centralize, because they, United Healthcare at that time, as I mentioned, was kind of migrating from this decentralized to a centralized platform. And so they were bringing all of their, claims and claims adjudication into a new system. And they designed that system to only pay one way. So if there were some sort of an adjustment that needed to be made, their systems couldn't do it. And that's why they had overpaid us $2 million in fees. So on the one hand, they were very upset with us because they overpaid us in fees. But on the other hand, they knew they had a bigger problem. And they still, even though they were really mad, they still wanted our support. So what we ended up doing was kind of doing a classic workaround for almost a year and a half. It took them that long to get their systems figured out. But as I mentioned earlier, right? Yeah. But as I mentioned earlier, that client is still a client of Cotivity's today. And like I view us as more of a partner of United Healthcare. So it was one of those things. It was a scary moment. It was terrifying, but like everything else, you kind of keep working through the problems. Hopefully, you have a client that's willing to kind of work with you, and the end of the story was pretty positive.
So a lot of the success you attribute in healthcare and other of your clients, you have a ton of credit in the book to the people that you work with, and that you brought on, and you made some really good hires, and you put a want ad that you posted in there, and I laughed out loud when I read it. You put an ad that said, "If you're clever and like to solve puzzles, we have a rewarding career for you," which is not typically the way you see job postings these days. And I'm shameless plug for Newcomb Tulane College, right? This is exactly what we train students for. We train thinkers and problem solvers, and we train students for careers that don't exist yet, and that's a hard sell sometimes. But I saw this and I was like, oh yeah, I know a ton of Tulaneans for this this ad from the 80s and 90s. So talk about your hiring. Talk about how you found these kind of great people after the networks, and what that was like.
It was really challenging because so this is our healthcare, we didn't have a big network of healthcare colleagues, right, to tap to find people to come work for us. And let's face it, we were this unknown company in the healthcare sector. We were relatively small, and who wants to come work for this obscure data analytics company that's small, but actually works for some pretty impressive clients, right? Had clients that were pretty impressive. So we were very, very challenged in hiring, and we were always looking for expertise that we didn't have. So that ad actually ran when we got healthcare client number 2, which is Humana in Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
But we again, we found some people to talk to that were really interested and quite fascinated with what we were doing, and the scale of what we were doing. And we ended up, again, Humana is still a major client of Cotivity's today. We have an office there and a very large team still working on that account. So we just had to get creative, and we got a little lucky.
And you had to get them in the right seats. Will you talk about that a little bit? Because
Yeah.
you've mentored me on this a bit, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about the right people; it's about getting the right people in the right seats on the bus.
Yeah. So we were classic. We made a lot of mistakes as we were kind of scaling. That's really a scaling question, right? Mm-hmm. Our idea of kind of growing the org chart was promoting our highest performers. That's the worst thing you can do. Right? You're just oh, you're great at your job. Now can you go manage 50 people or manage a portfolio of clients? And we realized that just didn't always work out. So once we read Bill Collins.
Yeah.
That's where that quote comes from. Good to great. Everybody needs to read that business book.
Yeah.
We began, it was oh, all the light bulbs went out. Yeah, you should be, thinking about, matching opportunity with skills. And we got much better at putting the right people in a job that, suited their skill sets. Of course, you never bat 1,000. But that was a major lesson that we learned. And it's your classic small company mistake when you're kind of growing very quickly, and you all of a sudden always make these decisions a year after you need to be making them.
Yeah.
So
and then it's urgent. You're that
urgent.
guy can do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. You just take anybody. It's need you in that seat.
All right, well, we're almost out of time, so one last question for you. You start to close the book with your family's passing of the company to private equity. Your brother retires as CEO. You move out of your senior leadership role. You move into board leadership, and you talked about that time as a time of transition and whether you would be a CEO. You said it wasn't really your true north. I read it very bittersweet for you, and I wanted to hear it from you.
Yeah. So when we sold the business, at this point in time, we were solidly viewed as a healthcare data analytics company. So we were drinking from the fire hose. We kind of knew we had reached kind of the peak of our abilities to kind of help this company reach its potential. So we looked for a high-quality private equity firm to make an investment in the company. We chose Advent International to do that, and they ended up being great partners. When they made their investment in the business, they really wanted to position the business, around our healthcare capabilities. They asked me to be CEO, and that was a very challenging time because a lot of people who had worked for the business kind of left for the business. Everybody who built this business started to leave the business, and it was feeling very, very lonely. We went through a period of a couple years. We had a major acquisition of like a company that was equal in size that I led. And then I knew that Advent's next step was to really take the company public. And I had a decision to make, at that point in time. What's next for Libby? Does she want to become the public company CEO? And I had a lot of friends and a lot of family and a lot of old colleagues all sitting there saying, Libby, why would you ever want to do that, right? You're financially secure. You've been killing yourself for the last, 25 years. Why would you ever want to do that? And I did spend a lot of time talking to analysts. We had to raise $800 million to do this deal. We refinanced 3 times in 2 years. So I kind of had a taste of what it felt like to talk to analysts. And I knew I could do it, but I also knew that I was a growth girl. I was a builder. And that really wouldn't be what my next job would be all about. I also didn't have a mentor, so I really didn't have anybody to talk this through with. And maybe that's a regret. But at the end of the day, the company did go public. It was public for only 18 months. And I knew that our business model was going to be problematic in the public markets. And that 18 months is a little bit of affirmation that my gut was kind of moving me in the right direction. That's that was the process that went behind me saying I didn't want to be a public company CEO. Yeah. Sometimes I kind of challenged myself and said, maybe you should have, been a little bit more open-minded about it. But life has worked out great.
Yeah. So you close the book talking about how proud you are, how proud of everything that you'd accomplished. I mean, writing the book is sort of the moment of taking it right from something that happened to you into something that you're learning, and how proud you are that you all figured it out, aptly named. I thought that was just a beautiful way to bookend it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.